This month, Beyond Clean turns 3 years old. With over 400,000 podcast downloads to date and listeners in 139 countries around the globe, you have helped us spark an education revolution in the sterile processing industry. What began as a podcast has turned into a movement. Now we offer over 100 CE credits approved for ISHM and CBSPD on our website, are hosting free live and virtual conference educational events, and are a leading voice of advocacy for frontline sterile processing professionals. To celebrate these milestones, please enjoy this highlight reel from our shows over the last 12 months. Thank you again for your support over these last few years, and as always, keep fighting dirty.
So we have our huddles around it every day. We have huddles at the beginning of each major shift change. We huddle around the board every day, and I really think it's a way to tie the staff to the work that they do, the importance of the work that they do in regards to the patient and as well as the organization.
We think that the more that partners and family, friends, neighbors of people who work in the sterile processing industry are engaged by what is happening with the films that we make, the more likely that positive changes can happen, as well as people just making informed decisions for themselves and loved ones. Like the informed consent piece that we talk about a lot in the Beyond Clean team has really taken root for me personally, having had someone very close to me having been impacted by a surgical site infection.
We always say an OR minute's not an OR minute in the sterile processing space, but a lot of health systems are still using that OR minute to determine staffing volume. And you guys can appreciate, better than anyone, that the number of items sterilized, which is really commonly used, it's not a good metric. Because Bob, as you can relate to, there's a lot of items that you process in your department that you're not necessarily sterilizing.
The number one thing that SPEC needs are sterile processing professionals who are aware of what we're doing and want to stand behind us because they're from the profession. They know how important it is more than anyone else. They know that patients' lives are in their hands just as much as everyone else involved in providing surgical care. And it's so disheartening to know that many countries in the world don't recognize it yet as an essential component.
I think it's a low percentage that have these enhanced magnification devices, but I think it also depends on what your definition of enhanced visual inspection is. Is it a 5X or a 10X? Then they're probably at least having the 5X, but we're working with optical magnifiers. And again, those are really archaic. It depends on how close that instrument is to the glass and our face to the glass, and there's that dynamic that you may or may not get that into focus. And the other side of it is that 5 times magnification isn't going to be enough for some of those instruments.
The sterilization process, once again, isn't ozone, it's hydrogen peroxide. Once again, the ozone is really used to break down the hydrogen peroxide at the end of the cycle. So I think there's a general, lack of awareness of, number one, that this is a gas, that it is extremely concentrated and very dangerous, and 3, that certain types of products may be designed in different ways and result in potentially higher exposure.
I have seen many hospital facilities where the HVAC systems are basically breeding grounds for biological contaminant, biological growth, mold, mildew, fungus, things of that nature. And what I have seen is the occurrence of those issues, particularly inside air conditioning units, particularly in the cooling coil cabinet areas where you've got moisture from condensate, you've got a dark, cold environment. The coils can load up with dirt if the filters aren't clean, and of course that creates the perfect breeding ground for mold.
When you're looking for a consultant, know what you want that consultant to do. You should have some idea or some clarity about the kind of expertise or assistance you're trying to get from that individual. Be honest about your willingness to change. A lot of organizations say they want to change, but when the consultant shows up, it's obvious that maybe they don't want to change. You want to find somebody that's focused on your needs, not their needs. And what I mean by that is a consultant, I need to know what the organization's needs are and then focus on that, but not what my personal needs are in that consulting opportunity.
Clinical studies from multiple groups in US and Europe shows that a significant number of patients undergoing revision spine surgery for loosened hardware actually have bacterial growth around the screw, but with no clinical symptoms of surgical site infection. When these bacteria get impregnated, they can lie dormant in the body and not result in early onset infection. When they lie dormant, they continue to hide from our immune system and biofilm formation on the implant. This biofilm now can break at any time. It could be 1 year, 2 years, 6 months. So if they break, they will cause a delayed or late onset response, and we will see it as infection. So delayed infection or late infection. There is a local response where the implant and bone begin to disassociate because of the biofilm. So we are calling this occult infection phenomena. There was no clinical symptom of infection, but there was still bacteria. This occult infection is resulting in implant to fail.
The hemostats really aren't used all that much except for the management of abscess. Interestingly, I had one case where I was using a hemostat to open up an abscess cavity, and the hinge on the hemostats broke, and the little tiny screw that held the two pieces together broke. And I had to basically go into this abscess cavity and try to dig out a little tiny screw. That was an eye-opening moment for me where I realized that, wow, it's not just having to open up another kit, this may lead to another procedure. I may have to do some advanced imaging to find this piece of broken equipment.
Since I was not an employee of the hospital and I had just came on scene offering my services, in my mind I was going in to help in surgery, being, from my PA background. But again, when I came through the door, the VP met me and asked me to immediately go into sterile processing because they were not producing instruments.
The Joint Commission usually issues safety alerts occasionally, and in 2014 and then again in 2017, coinciding with this information, they reissued safety alert on non-compliance, finding that it was actually increasing instead of decreasing. So there's definitely a problem with that out there.
So what are the misconceptions? They think it's okay. They think it's safe. They can smell it. They can, they're all the same, right? This one I don't have to worry about. So that's one thing that's really, really important. It's really important to know the difference and what's the right way to handle based on the chemical that you're using. And if you spill them, there are special requirements based on that specific chemical on how to clean it up and how to dispose of them. And that information you'll find in ST58 and in the manufacturer's instruction.
It's the OR leadership and the SPD leadership and the doctors who also bought into this process of we are in charge, the vendors don't run the hospital kind of deal. And it allowed the doctors to understand what is going on. It's not always SPD that's doing it wrong or SPD can't get it done fast enough. No, SPD just doesn't want to skip a step to make sure that patient is safe when they're using an instrument, especially something coming from vendors that are very difficult instruments.
Even drilling down a little farther, when we've taken a look at just certain specialties, for example, the general specialty, we've seen an average of 32 vendors in just that specialty alone. And again, think about that as you're a technician needing to find the IFUs, follow the IFUs, make sure you know the variation between different vendors. It can be pretty onerous.
As users, you don't know what those MDMs went through to develop what that time is. You can't say whether going a day over is actually going to have a problem or not. And frankly, the MDMs would have qualified it for longer if they thought it would be acceptable to do so. So yeah, they should be very concerned about using a device that has gone beyond its shelf life.
Everything you can think that could go wrong on a lot of these places from an instrument standpoint is going wrong. And that's not from a human side element. It's just from the lack of infrastructure, the lack of education, lack of resources to properly maintain a surgical instrument. For instance, you're going to see a lot of mineral deposit buildup. You're going to see a lot of rust, staining from just bad water supply and bad processes. You see a lot of missing instruments, a lot of broken instruments, missing screws, missing springs, a lot of bioburden. So that's kind of like one of the biggest challenges we face when we go to a hospital or a region.
What has happened as these bacteria have acquired these genes through evolutionary measures that render them resistant to these first, second, and third generation antibiotics, it may be that these previously harmless transmissions have now become insidious, serious infections. It may be that nothing is different. We do know some things are different. We do know the endoscope designs have changed somewhat. But an explanation might be because the runway has run out, and what we were getting away with before, we're not getting away with now.
It's critical for not only professional growth, but feeling like you're able to grow on a personal level as well, allowing yourself to say yes when sometimes it's really scary to say yes, and allowing yourself and encouraging yourself to just do it even when it's scary. Whatever the do it might be, whatever that next step is, just taking that leap, taking that chance, and allowing the connections that you've built to sort of lead you down a path that might not be comfortable, but it will grow and it'll allow you to stretch. And that's exciting. I think that that's sort of the lust for life mentality that I've used along the way, and hopefully will encourage other people to do the same.
It was perfectionism. I spent so much time developing and just editing, and I let perfectionism hold me back from putting myself out there. But I made a commitment to myself to overcome that because I knew that I had a message that was important enough that people needed to hear it. I think that a lot of people tend to struggle with focusing on a central message and building the tie-ins throughout the entire writing process.
What I didn't know back then, and what many OR folks don't know today, is what goes on in a sterile processing department. So I'm really passionate about bringing the groups together and helping them understand, and in particular the surgeons. The surgeons do not know what we do in our department, and I think it's really, really important that we keep reaching out and communicating with each other. We do a lot of tours of our department.
So I've spent the last 20 years of my career working to improve sterile processing departments, working on making a difference and creating intuitive systems in sterile processing so that new employees, new grads, existing employees can really go in and do their jobs and not be set up for failure, to make sure that patients have a safe outcome every time.
It means that instead of double sinks in sterile services, for me there should be an ultrasonic bath on each station, 20-minute cycle within the ultrasonic into an optimized washer disinfector. I'm particularly talking about high-risk instruments, so any neuro center I would expect to take in the same challenge as we did, test their current process and use it as an improvement tool to improve their decontamination process.
We don't always actively listen. Infection preventionists are keen to being on a lookout, and so sometimes they don't hear what people are saying to them because they're looking. So I think active listening is just one key methodology that we can use, and a strategy that I found, because staff will tell you what's wrong. You don't have to find it. They'll tell you because they want help and they want it to be better. Nobody wants to make anybody sick.
This has been a can of worms that nobody has wanted to take the lid off. We've seen the same problems, we've seen the same issues, and this has been since endoscopy started. You know, and we're talking 30, 40 years ago. Everybody's known the issues related to cross-contamination, patient infections, etc., and that's really what's driven the improvements in the ability to clean and disinfect endoscopes. The disinfection and the sterilization is the easiest part. The most difficult part is having a device that you know is in a condition to be able to be reprocessed, and that's fundamentally where the problem lays, that we do not know the internal condition of that endoscope.
There needs to be daily huddles between SPD and OR looking at the schedule for the coming days. And any questions in terms of a case needs to be addressed prior to the day of surgery or prior to the day of picking the case so that those things are resolved ahead of time.
The series of surveys we're sending out to define the current state of the workforce. All that data will be published in a peer-reviewed journal. As you guys know, we've got 50,000 people for whom we have emails for that we can send a survey out to, and it's a collaboration between the University of Wisconsin and Beyond Clean. and it's going to look at the socioeconomic status, the educational background of the workforce, and then also the safety of the work environment. And I think these things are going to be very important in terms of individual institutions with their sterile processing, leveraging to get better resources to be in a better position to do better work.
I live in a state where it's required CEUs every year to maintain certification and work inside of a hospital facility. So there's a lot of pros that come with that, whereas people have to maintain a certain amount of involvement with the growth of their field. But I think that underlines a big concern with why is a state law making you interested in your field?
And interestingly enough, with the control group screws, every single one of them showed evidence of crystalline type of deposits. And I came to the assumption, and it's purely an assumption because I wasn't able to qualify this in any real way, is that those crystalline deposits that I was observing were actually manufacturing residues. Now, you'd expect that those would be removed during the first reprocessing or the first cleaning cycle.
But when you start adding chemistry to a device that could leach, it may not leach before sterilization, but let's expose it to, heat, humidity, and now you can have increased leachables. And by the way, that's just not for colorants, that's for anything. Sterilization can have an impact in the leachability of a medical device. And cleaning, either taking away or adding of those. So when we've assessed the risk of a device, we have to look at it in its final form, because all those processes can impact what comes off a medical device.
Viruses, if you call them alive, there are more viruses than any living thing in the world. And so to the realm of learning how to make effective antivirals is really, really coming along a lot faster, but we still have so much to learn about all these different virus types.
To the professional development. So for instance, one of the additional things that we're working on right now is the partnership with local colleges and universities. Right now, we don't have a pipeline of workforce that are flowing through for training purposes. That is something in 2020 that we certainly want to build upon to ensure not only do we have the workforce for today, but our future workforce and recruitment and development needs are spoken to.